Okay, I guess I can get started now. Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your time today. My name is Sade. I am the director of Just Communities. I'm so excited about our presenters today and the conversation that their work sets up. So we will get into that in just a few minutes, but first I want to tell you a little bit about Just Communities, who we are and what we do. Okay, first slide. So these are the values that Just Communities is built upon. We like to say that we are a bold reimagining of how communities grow. We are a national network of community stakeholders and professionals that believe very deeply that land development can happen differently, and that as a result, cities can look differently. They can be much better off as we adapt to bigger and bigger climate challenges and economic challenges. We like to start off by sharing the values that Just Communities was built upon. I always think it's an important way to ground our conversation. So we believe in radical truth and understanding of history, healing and liberation, honoring the wisdom and power of communities, racial equity as the superior growth model, a just climate transition, and policies that reform, repair, and reconcile past harms. Next slide. So this is our model. We call it the Just Communities Protocol. Again, the two pillars that our model is built upon are racial equity and climate resilience. And then we came up with 22 commitments that we want communities to make to advance racial equity and climate resilience in their community. All of those commitments fall into one of these 5 areas that are inside the circle. So they are either environmental opportunity, which is economic, or they have to do with health and well-being, belonging, which is like cultural, social inclusion, or mobility. And then we came up with 17 actions to actualize those commitments. And we organized those actions into 5 phases, beginning with the groundwork phase, where you are really getting to know your community through data, um, building the energy and momentum for whatever planning you're doing for a project or your community, and then moving into the ground governance phase where you finalize or formalize that momentum into a formal governance structure that will oversee your whole planning process. And then moving from there into a roadmap phase where you are developing a work plan for all of the work that you are going to do, and then moving into the actual implementation of your work plan. So that is our model in a nutshell. Um, for those of you that are new to Just Communities, oh, and you can go to the next slide, Elaine. We are a reincarnation of the International Eco Districts model. We acquired eco districts a few years ago. We applied a really sharp racial equity lens to the model and relaunched it about 18 months ago as Just Communities. And we currently have these 2 offerings that I wanted to share with you all really quickly. Firstly, we have our accredited practitioners course, which is really for anybody that is as passionate and interested as we are about equitable and regenerative development. But it tends to attract a lot of professionals. So it's intended to be a professional development offering. Anybody that, touches the development process, from developers and architects to planners and community organizers. It is a approximately 8-hour course that basically walks you through our model so that you can use it, but also incorporates a lot of really robust analysis, conversation, We use case studies from, communities all over the world. And then after you complete the course, you can take it live or you can take it on your own pace online. You can take a 100 question exam to get accredited. So then you would be an accredited Just Communities practitioner. And then you would just renew your accreditation every couple of years by attending webinars like this for your continuing education credits. So that's one of our offerings. The other one you all are participating in right now, it is this webinar series. And our webinars are really intended to be a platform to really showcase the work that's already happening that is really illustrative of the model and the practices that we really want communities to commit to. I'm going to do a shameless plug for our webinar next month in August. We have Dr. Andre Perry, who you all are probably familiar with, definitely a superstar in the land justice, community wealth building, real estate world. He is going to be talking about his latest book, which is called The Black Power Scorecard. So you can register for that on our website. We will very soon be posting our webinars 6 months at a time so that you can register in advance. So hopefully we will continue to build this momentum in our community. And speaking of this platform, our webinars that we use to really show good works being done by good folks, I'm going to use that to segue to our speakers for today who are definitely doing the good works. And I just want to say before I introduce our speakers that I'm really excited about East Freedman Main and the conversation that we get to have today, because for those of you that are already familiar with our model, and even for those of you that aren't, you will see that we are really trying to set a really high bar for the values that we want developers, local governments, et cetera, to practice in their land use and development. And we firmly believe that that's the only way that this vicious cycle of long-term disinvestment followed by aggressive speculative investment followed by displacement, et cetera, that cycle can be broken where Black and Brown communities in particular are not destabilized by these forces. But of course, if you're a developer or the municipality, for example, you're probably asking, well, how do I pay for this? And what does the business side of this model that we're proposing look like? So it's really important to me and to our team that we're always putting forth strategies that address the barriers to the practices that we are holding up and that meet this particular moment because our market is shifting. And we also want to keep vetting our model to make sure that it's not only possible, but it's actually viable in the long term. So with all of that, I'm going to introduce our two lovely speakers. Our first speaker is Elise Douglas. And sorry, give me one moment. Okay, my screen froze for a second. So Elise Douglas is passionate about reimagining what Black economic opportunity can be. She believes strongly in the connection between real estate, solidarity economies, and racial justice. She specializes in leveraging strategic investments, partnerships, and bold visions to create the neighborhood economic hubs of the future. Prior to joining East Freedman Main, she held senior roles in California that focused on institutional scale development projects. And she built a strong track record of designing and implementing creative financing for small, medium, and large Black-owned businesses through her development projects, as well as impact investing roles in Oakland and New York City. So that's Elise. And then we also have Todd Heston with us, who's the managing director of East Freedman Main. Todd has over 15 years of experience in economic development. specializing in designing business technical assistance programs that promote equitable access and upward mobility for minority business owners. He's developed and managed a range of business support services, including workshops, accelerators, funding programs, with a focus on minority-owned businesses. And he's skilled in change management. He's led a decades-long research study on the effectiveness of business support programs for minorities in urban environments. So with all of that, I am going to hand it over to Elise.
Hi. Did we successfully transition? Okay.
You
Hello,
did.
everybody. I am going to share my screen, and we will go ahead and get started. Yes. Got it? Thumbs up top?
Looks
All
good.
right. So first of all, thank you everyone for being here. As mentioned, my name is Elise Douglas. I'm the founder and CEO of East Freedman Main, also known as EFM. You'll hear us say that a lot. I'm really grateful that you've taken the time to join us here today. I'm thankful to the Just Communities team and their whole ecosystem for inviting us to share our work. Today's session is really designed to do three things. One, tell us a little about ourselves, what our passion that we bring to this work. Second, talk about these themes of land, capital, and power, and how we've really tackled structural challenges in our work to date. And third, to open up for conversation, answer questions, and really collaborate with the folks on the calls on what might be possible, whether you're a practitioner, a funder, public agency, or just someone who wants to really be able to imagine what's possible in your neighborhood. I'm joined today by my colleagues Todd, who you'll hear speaking, as well as Tiana, who is in the comments, and probably some other folks who are listening in, who I hope have their little EFM tag in their name. But we're all very excited to be here. We'll do about 35 minutes of presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions. So feel free to drop those questions in the chat as we're going through. We also put in little QR codes across our materials. So if you want to reach out or you have questions, you can follow those. So before we dive into sort of the tactical, practical work we do, we wanted to really talk about what drives us and what part of our experiences are being reflected in our model and our mission, because it really does shape not just what we do, but why we do it and how we do it. For me, this work isn't very abstract. It's very much rooted in my own lived and generational experience. Like many people in the US today, my family is a product of slavery in the United States. And then we migrated to Philadelphia in the 40s under the pressure of Jim Crow, really trying to reimagine a life for our family and what that looked like. In Philadelphia, we experienced both the chosen migration, right, of seeking something that's better, but also a lot of that displacement that so often follows communities across the country when they do seek a better life. And so over generations of moving and relocating and rebuilding, that became our mode of survival. But I think eventually my family, as well as people across the country, and I think like today, it was mentioning like that question of what does it mean, particularly for liberation, if we can stay in the places where we invest, and if we could build on what came before us instead of starting over every generation, particularly when what we've built has been taken away from us. As you guys know, in my bio, I've worked in development impact investing across the country for a number of years, even before starting EFM. And that's really the question that I was interested in exploring. What does that mean, particularly for different types of communities in different contexts? And I think this is important because not only does that impact Black communities and people who are descendants of slaves in the US, but also other types of marginalized, disenfranchised, and folks who are excluded nationally. So it's really impossible, I think, as you look at our structures and our system and how we think about community development, real estate, doing neighborhood scale development, without seeing how those structural barriers mean the status quo of how we do those things isn't working for the majority of the people in this country. When we started East Freedman Main, the idea is really actually rooted in a belief that communities that have been exploited and disenfranchised, they're actually exploited and disenfranchised, right? But they're not broken, right? There's actually a lot of vision and strategy and memory and power that are in these places. And what's missing isn't talent and will, it's access to tools and capital and resources and all the things they needed to be able to build a future that's aligned with the vision and values. Um, and I always feel like it's important to say that because I think people, like I'm sure you guys on the call, I can't see you, but I'm sure you guys who do this work, you know that's true, but it's actually something that needs to be said outright. And so we always lead with that. And the company and the group that we build is really about these are structural problems that these communities and these leaders are facing, and how can we learn about those challenges and design structural solutions. So dismantling systems in new ways, creating new types of ecosystems where it's not just about imagining that vision for the future, but really being able to build and implement it and create things that we haven't seen before in terms of the communities that we want to be able to live in for generations. Practically, as a company, we are an impact real estate advisory development consulting platform. So we partner with community-based organizations across the country. So we're national, we work with folks on a local level. And everyone that we work with is working to build their own equitable future, typically through real estate development, community ownership, and place-based economic developments. And our specialty is really combining the three and figuring out using models that address a lot of the tactical structural issues that keep those things from coming together in ways that create real value and wealth for communities. And that's actually really reflected in our name. So East Freedman, Main is the number one question is where is that? And the answer is it does not exist. It's actually a mythical intersection is what we call it. But it could be anywhere, and it's also everywhere we want to be, right? So it's the intersection between culture, legacy, place, and future, and it's our guiding principle around how we approach every partnership in every place in America that we have the opportunity to build what we want to believe or what we want to see. Um, some quick background on our theory of change as we get into like how do we actually do this. And I'm so glad that Just Communities is hosting Andre Perry webinar coming up. I'm a huge Andre Perry stan. So a lot of our theory of change and the research that goes beyond, particularly asset value creation and real estate development, is deeply rooted in his research and work. So, you know, it starts with, like I said, leading with community. We put community, their vision and values first. So often, I know you guys see in real estate, it's like the real estate, the money is more important than the vision and values. And we actually reverse that. We think your vision and values and the people who are in these places, that is more important than the traditional structures of real estate and capital that should be supporting them, not the other way around. Um, when we talk about our intersection of opportunity, that's very much about Andre Perry's theory of community context value that says that neighborhoods are not just housing, they're a collection of assets that create value together, and there's infrastructure and relationships between them. And so as we invest and we think about neighborhoods, we don't just think about one asset, we think about the entire ecosystem of products that create a thriving place-based ecosystem. And third, when we talk about an integrated model, we don't talk about creating equity as an outcome. There's equity in the products, there's equity in the process, there's equity in who owns it, there's equity in who participates it. And that is something that structurally and tactically we integrate into everything that we do in all of our projects and how we work. I think this is sort of the genesis of where we come from. And obviously, as a Black woman, in my own personal experience, we really started this as a sort of a lens on what this could do for structural challenges in Black communities. But we've seen how this type of tactical strategy actually supports all different types of folks across the country who are experiencing disenfranchisement. And sort of this concept of, when we deal with structural challenges in new ways, everyone learns and benefits from overcoming those. So to date, we lost into 2021. Yes, so 2021, we've done, this slide is now a little bit out of date because this is from 2024, but we've worked in over 5 states. In a typical year, so last year, we did about $250 million in impact capital commitments across the projects and the work that we do. It's well over $1 billion in real estate development pipeline across our partners, and well over 1 billion square feet of real estate that we supported and built, all of which equitable and community owned across the country. And so it's not so much about the fact that there's a lot of work, because I think everyone, regardless of where you're from, there's lots of opportunity. It's the fact that all of that is community owned, community controlled, and reflective of the vision and of the values of the people who are part of those projects, which I think is the coolest part of that. And we obviously have a team, not just myself and Todd, lots of other folks in the comments and across the country, and we collaborate. I understand a lot of the folks who attend this are practitioners themselves. These are some of the folks we work with, Urbane, Brett Bay, on Capital. We work, fiscal sponsors when we need them, and Barbara C. Harris Foundation, and in New England, Clay Cove Impact Capital for institutional real estate, and United Development, often when we're doing faith-based developments in the sort of New York metro region. Okay, so now a little bit into the tactical side of how we do these things. That tends to be our specialty, not just sort of designing a vision, but really getting it done. We work in kind of 4 key areas, and they intersect and reinforce each other. So first, comprehensive neighborhood strategies. So like that community context value strategy. We don't just look at one asset, we look at all of the assets within a neighborhood, how they relate to each other, how they create value, and we partner with communities to design what that looks like, how they would be able to secure those assets, and then how they'd be able to position them for equitable development. In our equitable development work, that's actually taking a particular site or building and bringing it to life. Typically, we focus on anchor assets, so the types of projects that can drive economic development for an entire neighborhood. The third piece of our work is really around wealth building and economic mobility. So these are a series of tools we built to ensure around that idea of equity in our processes and our ownership and who participates. So this is everything from working with communities to design and implement community ownership models to our business technical assistance ecosystems that Todd is going to talk about in a second. And then lastly, our community-focused capital strategies, because again, I'm assuming there's lots of people on this call, and I think Sade mentioned it in the beginning, where there's, we can put the most beautiful plans on the planet, we can format them, we can make them gorgeous, but if we can't capitalize them, if we can't actually bring in the money to do it, then we've lost our opportunity. And so our work around community-focused strategies is really designing and implementing the capital we need, not just the capital that exists in the market today. From a real estate standpoint, this is getting in much more in the brass tacks, but we have a framework for how we work with communities, starting with visioning, going into concept development, then going into implementation, dealing with the complexities of lots of development, lots of assets at one time, doing different products, doing stuff at scale. So we understand that can be prohibitive to communities, but it shouldn't. Real estate is something technical, but it can be learned, and you could bring in people to help. And so that's sort of the vision behind a lot of our real estate work. Our community-focused capital strategies, like we talked about, tactically, this can look like everything from impact capital fundraising and catalytic capital relationship building, network building, all the way through designing and capitalizing vehicles. So, you're a neighborhood, you need to buy up a lot of land. How do you build a flexible structure that will allow you to compete with speculative investors? That is something we'll talk about in our case studies. But this is sort of an example. And we also have some national funds that we're rolling out in the next couple of years that can help build sort of intermediary infrastructure to support communities across the country working in collaboration. And then wealth building and economic mobility, which is really about, like I said, what are the pieces, that connective tissue between what we build and how it actually creates wealth and opportunity for communities. And I will pass over to Todd right now to do a little bit of a deep dive on BTAP technical assistance and why we think that's such an important part of our model.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elise. And we could go to the next slide. There we go. And again, my name is Todd Hestand, and I am the Managing Director for Business Technical Assistance Programs with East Freedman Main. Similarly, I grew up in the Deep South. My father was a chief engineer for steel plants, and we were moved from small town to small town. And one of the most important things that he taught me, and we saw this especially in the late 70s, early 80s, is it's about community growth. It's not just about the company. It's about looking holistically at the community. If you want something to succeed, you have to build systems around it. And the more interplay that there was among the businesses, among the community, and among faith-based organizations, the better the community thrived. And we saw that everywhere that we went. And I always hope to honor them by the work that we do. So to that extent, for about the last 20 years or so, I've been running business technical assistance programs specifically for minority communities. That first started at a place called the Corso Center. And the Corso Center was a 10-year longitudinal research study, university-backed, studying what elements were really necessary for business technical assistance programs to be successful in creating upward mobility for minority audiences in urban communities. So basically what it looked like is this. We would run a assistance program year after year, changing the model a little bit after a little bit. And then we track all of those participants year on year to see how successful they were at sustaining their businesses over the course of a 3-year period. So even though it was a 10-year study, it was more like 12 years because we tracked throughout the duration. And what we saw from the beginning of the study to the end was we were able to increase the likelihood, or not even likelihood, the actual sustainability of businesses by over 30% across all of our participants by just tweaking that business technical assistance model little by little until we found the right elements that make it work. From that, we developed a part of our theory of change that East Freedman Main uses, which is called validation management. And it's our methodology that we use for developing business technical assistance programs for our clients. Now, we've rolled this out a number of times at this point, and the first was using this in the research model, but then it was taking it into real life. So one of the first experiences was with a program called Rebuild Ready. This is a program of $300 million of funding for infrastructure development in the city of Philadelphia, where there was to rebuild up to 200 city Philadelphia parks, libraries, and community centers. And at the very beginning, the results were pretty much what you expect. Most of the RFPs that went out for doing these projects were being won by majority firms. So the Rebuild Ready program was implemented as part of our methodology to integrate minority general contractors and subs into these firms. We ran 3 cohorts, and by the time we had 3 cohorts and about 20 participants through the program, they were successfully winning bids on these jobs. So we introduced those into the ecosystem. Then let's think about scaling that up even more. And the next stage is this minority developer program. This is a huge program for the city of Philadelphia to build affordable housing. Similarly, as Rebuild Ready, that started out as 1,000 units of housing that were put out for RFP. And at the very beginning, all of them were being won by middle market majority firms. So a minority developer program was implemented using our methodology. And after 2 cohorts and a couple partnerships, we now have over 25 minority developers building over 300 units of affordable housing, and that equates to over $65 million of development through only minority developers in the program. Absolutely phenomenal. So we're seeing it working, we're seeing it growing, and we'd love to see that happen for your community as well. So Elise, let's go to the next slide, please. So what is economic development success? Just because you build something doesn't mean you've sparked economic growth. And just because a small business now has a storefront doesn't mean it's going to guarantee that it's going to thrive long term. And just because you're committing to supplier diversity and contractor diversity doesn't mean you actually have the resources and tools to follow through with it. There has to be more around it. So business technical assistance programs are both necessary and important in your ecosystem. And it's not important not only to integrate the businesses into the community development process, but also cultivate their resiliency and use the resiliency as a launching pad for long-term growth, for ownership, and for economic power. What's that mean in plain language? Very simple. As a business owner, you have to be able to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before your business. So if we're not supporting the business owners as people and understanding that as people, they have needs that have to be met first, healthcare needs, housing needs, and mental health needs, then their businesses aren't going to be successful. So a good business technical assistance program addresses both their business needs as well as their personal development needs. Now, theories like our theory of the change are supported by science. So our BTAP secret sauce is, are you ready? Don't let anybody know. Don't let anyone know. Running them like a scientific experiment is key. That's what makes it work. That's what makes it work. It's a win-win because you're offering services and you're aggregating data at the same time. And that data is what allows you to make informed decisions about how to modify and change your program, as well as pivot to other community needs that are needed along the way. That's really, really critical. And that data-driven approach is what makes it a win for the community. It's offering both services and that collecting data. And what this does is it accomplishes by promoting a holistic, standardized business technical assistance program and framework for your community. All right, so what does that mean? Next slide, Elise. So there are 3 different components to providing a great business technical assistance program that works and helps scale within your community. And we say ecosystem of care, continuum of care, and system of care. Why is it of care? Because we care about the individuals that are going in this even more so than their businesses, right? We want to see their businesses succeed, but we need to see you succeed as a person first before we do anything else. The ecosystem of care helps you understand and map the full landscape of your local resources. That's your stakeholders, your institutions, your services, your capital, all to align across efforts in the community. That's our first step. Then the second step is the continuum of care. And that's being able to design to support a clear, upwardly mobile path for entrepreneurs and businesses as they go through your particular program. They should always know what's next and where they need to go, and manage their expectations. It's that through line that's available. The last part is the system of care. And this is really often overlooked when we're talking about business technical assistance programs. It's not just about what you do, it's how you do it. It's being able to translate your vision into implementation. And it's building intentionality and values-driven systems into your particular program. It's how you connect, defining your mission statement of your organization and translating that directly into customer support. And I'll give you just a couple examples there to make sure we're clear. A system of care, we could say in a meeting, is we start on time and end on time because we respect your time. That's one of my favorites, right? And another system of care that could be defined is intentionality in supplier diversity. In your mission statement, you may say, okay, we want to see at least 50% minority inclusion in our supplier diversity program, and finding ways to stick to that. And better than 50%, we hope, in a lot of communities. Those are items that you might find in a system of care, but it is a written document that translates to exactly how you are going to hold yourself accountable to your continuum of care that is being developed and supporting your ecosystem of care across your community. So next slide, Elise. So when we're working with our clients, we take them through a logical progression of services. First and most importantly, we want to talk about needs assessment. What are our clients' needs, and how can they operate financially and with resiliency within your particular ecosystem? What do you want to achieve, and what are your goals? How can we help you get there? The second, like any good scientific study, research, research, research. We do this by resource mapping of the stakeholders throughout a community. And again, those are your community organizations, those are your technical assistance providers, both for-profit and nonprofit, as well as all the funding sources that are in your organization, in your area, so that you understand where you can go and what you need to do in order to build that ecosystem of care. The next step is developing the program design and implementation plan, which basically means, what is your service mix offering? What's the curriculum that you want to offer? What are the surveys and other feedback implements that you can use for your program, so that you're doing continuous data collection, so you know exactly what you need and where to deploy those strategies and funding dollars effectively. And lastly, a preliminary business plan. So at that point, we can take a look and see what you need to do to implement it in terms of operations, in terms of marketing. Where are there opportunities for revenue stream development in this particular type of program, as well as looking at your human capital assessment and seeing what type of individuals and services, both inside and outside your organization, can help you deploy this type of program. So that's our model from start to top. If you're interested in learning more about our BTAP tools for your community, you can join us for a deep dive. Our next one is going to be Tuesday, September 16th. We'll drop a link in the chat where you can sign up for our email newsletter and receive updates and registration links. But we're really excited about sharing more resources about BTAP with you as part of our model. So that's it. Thank you for your time, and back to Elise.
Thanks, Todd. Yeah, so, as part of building EFM, what we've had to do is build a lot of tools to be able to support the communities that we work with. So where things don't exist, or where they exist but they're not working well, we've kind of built out these suite of tools to support them. And so now for the case studies, what we're going to do is talk about what it looks like to combine a bunch of the tools we have in one specific place. And how those can create the outcomes that our communities are looking for. So we're really going to talk about two places today. We're going to talk about Lawndale Christian Development Corporation, which is in North Lawndale on the west side of Chicago. And we're going to talk about Northwest Bronx Community Clergy Coalition, which is in Northwest Bronx in the Bronx in New York. And these are two organizations that we've worked with for more than 2 years, I think, at this point. They're very different geographically, and how the various threats that are facing their neighborhoods. They're similar organizations in that they come from a strong organizing background. But how they are responding both to the threats that they're facing, as well as how they are defining what their organization is going to be in the face of that threat, is something that I think is really powerful, and a lot can be learned for everyone from practitioners to folks on the ground doing this work. To try to organize this, there's about 4 or 5 things that both of these groups really had to address in their planning and their implementation, and how we've worked with them over the past 2 years. So starting with a clear vision and values framework is a must. We have yet to work with a group that hasn't handed us if they've already done the work, they've handed us the 2-page, like, this is what we care about as an organization. And if they haven't done that work, we work with them to get that work. But it's very clear to start with, these are our values, this is our vision, not just the buildings we want to build. I usually describe, it's not just the buildings we want to build, it's how we want to feel when we live in this neighborhood for multiple generations. And that is something that's really important to articulate on paper. Then we do sort of a comprehensive neighborhood strategy, which is looking at all the real estate assets, all the other business assets and infrastructure they have in the community. Everywhere we have to do tactical anti-displacement tools, which looks at how do we compete for our land, how do we secure it, how do we pay for it and capitalize it. Everyone has a community ownership model, which looks very different everywhere. The person who said community ownership model should have been much more clearer around the capital O community ownership and all the other variations thereof. But making sure that you design one that's reflective of community values, again, is incredibly important. And then building the capital around it. Everything from early catalytic capital through institutional scale investment to really be able to bring these things to life. Because we're talking about a neighborhood scale. We're talking about what does it mean to put $1 billion in one place. And that still not be enough to really achieve the types of outcomes and overcome structural racism in the ways we want to see. And so that's why we're so specific on our approach, our framework, and our tactical interventions. So I'll start. So LCDC, they are about a 50-year-old organization. I noticed after I did these slides that these organizations are both 50-year-olds, but by no means do we only work with 50-year-old organizations. We actually work with quite a few startups, folks who are early in their organizing and advocacy career as they're thinking about building the tools. But we like to use these two organizations because their strong track record for organizing really translated into the outcomes of what they were able to create. But they started 50 years ago. A lot of their work was the inspiration for Dr. King's housing justice campaign, because of the types of divestment and exploitation that was happening in real estate in Chicago during this time. And for the past 50 years, they've really been in somewhat of a stabilization mode, right? The population has drastically decreased in the neighborhood. They have built over 500 affordable homes. They have built the largest community health center, I believe, in Chicago. I know that they write more prescriptions than Walgreens throughout the entire Chicagoland area. And they have the first restorative justice court in America. So they've really done the work in terms of meeting the needs of the community as it exists today. But now, as population and trends are changing, right? The gentrification is coming. There's growth coming from the West Loop. It might not look like it, but I've seen land prices go up 2, 3, 4 times in the past 3 years. So there's a lot of speculative real estate activity happening in the market. And the question for them became not just how do we serve this existing community, but how can we ensure that there's always a place for these people here, and even as that neighborhood changes. And how do we create a really diverse place-based ecosystem that supports those folks, not just with housing, but with jobs and wealth and opportunities to grow? And so their answer is this concept called the Reclaiming Campaign, starts with a plan to build 1,000 single-family homes, all for sale and affordable in the community, and then anchored by a commercial development ecosystem that's really locally owned and rooted in North Lawndale. So the video you're about to see, which I'll play for like 2 seconds, you'll hear directly from some of the LCDC team from the press conference from a couple of years when they talk about the Reclaiming Campaign and sort of what it means to them to be able to create this type of ownership and wealth in this community. I'll just keep it cute. Well, we can go because there's other videos. I don't know how to change the slide. Okay, so then how did we come into the picture? So we began working with LCDC in 2022, specifically on the place-based ecosystem to surround the 1,000 single-family homes, right? So the idea being that how do we create, like we talked about before, jobs, economic opportunities, not just housing and places for folks to live. And so we really started with a comprehensive neighborhood real estate inventory and market analysis. So when we talk about, this neighborhood's changing, which I think people see all the time, it's really quantifying and understanding what that means. How does that implicate on real estate prices, on financing? So we're doing that deep sort of analysis on what are the actual risks and opportunities from a real estate and financing perspective. And then identifying sites that are potentially something that they could control across the neighborhood. And so from there, we design and capitalize kind of their first wave of equitable development projects. And each of them is intended to anchor a level of affordability and create space for economic mobility in this group of folks in Lawndale. So the first is a co-op business incubator that provides affordable commercial space to small businesses and entrepreneurs that are started and rooted in Lawndale. The second is a construction trade school on the West Side. So it supports West Side residents in partnership with the community colleges of Chicago, putting them in high skills, high paying construction jobs. And the third is our recreation center with interior, one of the only interior safe places for kids and youth in the community. As a general amenity, as well as a service delivery hub for this part of the city. We identified about another couple of sites that are for mixed use and supportive housing so that the neighborhood isn't just owners, it's also renters. And so there's an inclusivity and diversity in who lives in that neighborhood, who's able to stay, really bringing together this kind of holistic vision for economic activity and ownership in the neighborhood. All of this is anchored and tied together by their co-op ecosystem, which is where they recruit, train, and capitalize entrepreneurs in the community to become business owners. And those folks then end up being the tenants in the commercial ecosystem and the retail spaces. And that's how we sort of create this tissue that connects all these pieces together. And that was really the vision that we started with. One of the challenges, we're trying to pull out all the different challenges that we know people face. So like you're dealing in a speculative land environment with speculative investors, they're paying cash, right? How do you as a nonprofit pay for cash for land where people can pay whatever because they're going to oftentimes build things that are going to bring back much higher returns. And so they can, pay higher prices than you typically would. So, without making this a big presentation about gentrification math, like that's a real structural challenge in the places that we work. So with LCDC, one of the first things to make them be able to be competitive to secure land, both for that first wave of development and for future acquisitions, is we did a capital campaign that helped them raise early catalytic capital that was low cost and flexible. So that would help them build their internal operations operations capacity as an organization and their own balance sheet so that they could take and leverage more capital in the future. And then we worked with really aligned partners like CDFIs, like IFF in Chicago and the Staines Family Foundation. And we basically created customized structured lending vehicles. So think like lines of credit and other types of integrated capital vehicles that allowed them to be able to compete and access capital at scale at a lower cost and be able to buy land quickly. Without throwing their entire organization under the bus in order to do so. And so that was something that we really had to be intentional about how we design to enable this vision that they had. And then the last piece, you know, I wanted to just hint on, obviously, like we mentioned one of our tools is the BTAP ecosystem, and like how does that play into this? One of the important parts was like, okay, if we're going to build all these commercial spaces, we need to make sure we have tenants. They had already the infrastructure for the co-op business ecosystem. I think to date they've probably trained definitely over 100 and probably more at this point participants. They have 4 soon to be 5 co-op businesses that they've already launched. And so the question became, okay, we applied our BTAP methodology to ensure that those tenants were ready to sign leases, essentially, and be the tenants in the commercial spaces that we were bringing online. And building the appropriate technical assistance ecosystem and resources for those co-ops is something that the Todd led to ensure that, you know, again, we're not just building buildings, we're not just giving people space, but we're really creating opportunities to thrive. And this is Whitney, who's the director of the co-op, sort of describing what it meant for them to be able to do something like that and how it aligned with their vision. The sound might be a little weird on this one, so you have to give me a thumbs up and I'll turn it off. But
Hey, Elise, I just wanted to tell you that we're not getting sound on the video.
oh, okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you guys can enjoy Whitney's face. These are all on YouTube. Oh, sorry, she's gonna kill me if I pause it right there. You can look at these all on YouTube. There's lots of videos from a lot of the folks that we work with talking about that piece. But you know, the importance of the co-op to them in terms of knitting their ecosystem together can't be overstated. And so then what were the outcomes? So we've been working with them for a couple of years. This year, I will start our first round of construction financing closes on a couple of the projects. Several of the capital vehicles, both the short-term and the long-term vehicles for acquisition are launching. And the co-op BTAP ecosystem has now been transferred over in a lot of ways from us to internal into LCDC's staff and capacity, which I think is always very important. You know, we're consultants. Our goal is to make sure that we help folks get to where they're going and then hand them the reins so that they can run it for the long time. So that's a big accomplishment right now. And they're 2 of the 4 finalists for the Chicago Prize this year, really demonstrating the importance and power of sort of the model they've set for what it looks like to kind of do holistic community development at this scale. Okay, and was it all the videos or just this one, that one? All the videos? Okay. Well, the next one, if you guys can't hear this one, you can let me know. The next one I wanted to talk about is Northwest Bronx Community Clergy Coalition. So again, this is another group, best known, deep-rooted advocacy. Oh, sorry. Can you sit there? I saw you jump on. Will you
I
guys
was
be
just
able
gonna say, if you want to just make sure that all of your sound stuff is turned on your computer, because I think it might be your local to your computer, just to see. If not, it's okay. We'll just drop the link in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to break it up so you guys didn't have to hear me talking the whole time, but you have to watch these on your own. That's okay. I'll describe it for you. So Northwest Bronx, they've been around many decades, well known as the advocacy and organizing work. But their neighborhood now has the highest rate of displacement for both businesses and residents in New York City. So they're facing kind of unprecedented pressures in terms of what is the future of this neighborhood going to be. And in 2023, going into 2023, they were really presented with an unprecedented opportunity, which is the Kingsbridge Armory, which is probably the largest, most vacant site in this entire neighborhood. It's very much a donut. It's been empty for about 30 years for now, and it's a massive building which could, in a lot of ways, either be a real economic engine that could really counter a lot of the forces that that community was facing, or it could become the thing that, you know, puts the final nail in the coffin, or the thing that really exasperates a lot of the work that's been happening. And I think as an organization, they made a really powerful but often challenging choice. Instead of being an advocate, and they've been involved in all the previous development and attempts of this project for at least 30 years, instead of being just a community benefit partner, instead of sort of standing on the sidelines and trying to advocate for what they wanted, they made a really brave, I think, choice based on their democratic and community-led values to actually shift to ownership. Their question is, what if we owned it? And they decided to put in a competitive bid for this highly competitive project in New York City to actually own and develop the armory. Sorry. This is a really good video. You should watch them, but not now. I don't know how to change it. Okay. So they brought us in to help them lead the process of putting together their bid and their vision for the armory. They are another group that handed us a 2-page piece of paper and said, this is what we care about, and help us bring this alive. And so I love a 2-pager. That's what we tell people a lot. And their goals were really clear. They wanted this site to have community ownership and accountability. They wanted to ensure there's a 99-year ground lease with the city of New York. So they wanted to make sure that not just now, but for the next 99 years, they had control and accountability around what happened at the site. They wanted long-term affordable space for Bronx businesses, particularly manufacturing and retail, who are under, like we talked about, displacement threats. And they wanted the creation of high-paying, high-skilled jobs, particularly for Bronx residents, so that we weren't just supporting business owners, but also folks who are part of the labor force. There's also strong commitments around labor, and both on the construction and the long-term operations of the building. And so the concept we developed is really an economic hub for this neighborhood. It was anchored by affordable manufacturing, retail, and community services space. It had a large-scale live events venue that was anchored by Live Nation, that really kind of bought the economic activity, that supported all the small businesses and the jobs. And so we really created an ecosystem that addressed a lot of the needs and lack of access in terms of workforce development that that community was facing at the time. And I wanted to talk about this example because I think a lot of the big shot that people and community groups have for control in neighborhoods is through public RFPs. The challenge is that even for the most well-intentioned city agency, those things are not actually designed in a way to make community organizations win. And that's an incredible structural challenge. The cost of participation in and of itself is often high. The thresholds for feasibility and access to capital, like those things often put people in a loss before they even have the opportunity to put a bid in. And so we really had to tactically design a project and a strategy that would, at every step of the way, overcome those barriers and partition in Northwest Bronx to be in a leadership position in this project. And that we've been it took about 2 years. So it started with raising early catalytic funding through our network of funders and relationships to actually bring in the team that they would need to be able to execute and put in the bid. We structured a mission aligned development team. So we found them development partners who were at scale that had balance sheet while understanding the role and decision criteria that they wanted to make in the project. So they had both the technical expertise and track record to execute, as well as balance sheet strength, just in alignment with their vision. And then we had to develop a really comprehensive financing strategy and community ownership structure that weren't in contention with each other to ensure that the project was actually feasible, but still met their long-term affordability goals. And this is an over $1 billion project. So there was a lot of work and strategy and folks that came in to make this possible. And for the actual RFP itself, which we talk a lot with people, and I always think this is important for folks to know, you know, it's very much Game of Thrones process, but how we showed up in that moment was incredibly important. We had over 26 tenant LOIs, over 27 letters of support from community organizations across the neighborhood that they had been working with for decades, and through their organizing work, and over $200 million in impact capital LOIs that we had secured in about a 4-month period. So this was a huge lift in terms of demonstrating capacity, feasibility, and the role of what would be possible for a community-based organization to be in this role. And you can't see this video, but the outcome was, after those 2 years, actually just this summer, kind of the unthinkable happened. They, in partnership with 8th Regiment Partners, they, who was awarded the, excuse me, this summer, the unthinkable kind of happened. There were 8th Regiment Partners and Northwest Bronx put a partnership together, which we worked on for about 9 months, and they became an owner of the project. They secured 100,000 square feet and over 25,000 square feet for community services space. The original 100,000 square feet is light, affordable manufacturing space. It's probably one of the largest community-owned projects in the country now. And through that fight, it was that early investment and that strategy that brought them to this place, to be able to create this type of economic impact and engine for their community. If you read the press releases or watch the videos, they talk very specifically about the role, the capacity building work that we did, and the positioning strategy in terms of their original proposal helped them get to this point where they are today, to be able to be in a leadership role in this project going forward. So maybe it's good we didn't get the videos, because I think we're over time, but I just want to say, you know, I appreciate you guys hanging in there with us. We're a new company. We're new to also sharing our work. I think this is the first time we've gone in depth into case studies like this, because obviously we play a real background role in helping people succeed. It's not usually about us, but this is a sort of practitioner community, so I think it made sense. We have a couple ways to engage with us. You know, I'm sure Tiana is going crazy in the comments section, but we have that. You can subscribe to our newsletter. You can just send us emails. We have a BTAP webinar in September, like Todd mentioned, and we travel all around. So we're based in Philly, but our team is fully remote, and these are just some of the dates that correspond to various conferences we've already RSVP'd for in the next couple of months. So if you're interested, or if there's any overlap, we'd be happy to have a conversation and learn about how we can work together, or if there's any way we can help and support what you're trying to do. And I think that's it. Now it's just Q&A.
Hey, I just popped back in here in case you guys need me, but feel free to I have a question of my own, but feel free to first address the other questions in the Q&A.
Okay. I don't know, Tiana, did you pick out or Tiana might be in the comments. Maybe she can't tell me. I will.
You want me to? Oh, go ahead, Todd.
Yep,
Yeah.
I'll QA the Q&A.
Thank you.
So one of the questions from the Q&A is from Denise Bozeman, and Denise asks, "Greetings. My question is multi-layered. I am the housing manager for Day One on the behalf of the Eaton Fire Collaborative. I'm personally interested in how these plans are integrated into LTRG models, from temporary, transitional to permanent housing. These conversations presented are down the line. We have made intentional partnerships to also have historic preservation for land. As you know, in Altadena, developers have already made their bids purchases. What examples can you present from a very beginning to a permanent model?" That's a big question, Denise. Let's take a little bit of that at a time, though. Elise, where would you like to start?
Yeah, and thank you, Denise, and I appreciate the work that you're doing on behalf of your community. I think that sort of like spirit of fighting is something that we always want to hold space for, like, you know, when things are lost. So thank you for doing that work. Actually, the first thing that comes to mind, one of our partners, Elizabeth Moriarty, who may or may not be on this call, uh, um, has done quite a bit of work in New England with temporary and warming shelters and different types of temporary housing in emergency situations for folks. And I bring that up because I think as part of ecosystem design, you think of everything as part of a continuum. Even when we build affordable housing, like we mentioned in the LCDC example, it's not enough just that we build 1,000 single family homes. We also need to build rental homes and supportive housing and other types of products that support people on their way to that journey. So I think this framework of both how you design the comprehensive neighborhood strategy around what are the pieces that we need for both meeting people where they're at versus where they're going becomes really important to have an intentional strategy to kind of hit those paces, like we going from temporary into long-term solution. I'll also say, I think your second question was around capital and competing with speculative developers. This is like the key thing when we talk about structural, like all the structural barriers, this is the barrierist, right? How do you identify and secure capital to do that? And a lot of our work has to deal with integrated capital strategy. So starting with catalytic capital, but understanding there's not enough catalytic capital in the world to fund, there's not enough philanthropy to actually fund all the equitable real estate developments we need in our life. So we actually have to figure out a way to tap into institutional scale impact real estate capital markets. And without knowing, all the details of your neighborhood and your work, I assume it's going to be relatively high cost and it's a similar strategy. And so that means designing your capital stack and your financing strategy in a way that doesn't just appeal to catalytic capital, but also to institutional capital. I guess the metaphor we use is we design a table and we invite everyone to take a seat with an understanding that if catalytic capital doesn't come in, and then institutional capital can't come in, and if institutional capital can't come in, catalytic capital can't come in. And that's how we design and bring all of our collaborators and funders to the same sort of mission alignment around what it looks like to be able to work together to achieve something at scale. I know there's like a lot of other stuff in that question, so we'd be happy to have another conversation. We'll be out in California. We have a project in California, in Southern California currently. So we'll be out of there next month and in September, but we'd be happy to have a conversation and talk more in detail and share like very specifically, like here's some of the funding mechanisms, here's some of the like capital vehicles and things we built specifically around like you need cash relatively quick to be able to compete. I hope that helps. I actually really want to get a lot deeper with you on this question, but I know we don't have a ton of time, but happy to talk more.
There's a couple more questions in the Q&A. The next couple are from Kisa Johnson. These are about the some BTEP questions. So Kisa asks, what are the resource verticals and what's a resource guide map? So when we're talking about resources and doing all of the research, first and foremost, it's always specialized to the client. So we'll look for what you need, what your particular organization or community is looking for. But the primary resource verticals are one, community organizations, those that are providing both personal and business support programs already in your community. And ideally, what we're looking for is we're doing a gap analysis to see who's doing what's missing, and how can we help you fill in the gaps. All right. The second is that resource guide map. So we put all of that in whatever type of platform that works best for you, and we can share that with you, whether it happens to be a CRM like Salesforce or simply putting it into a spreadsheet like Google Sheets. Or it could be doing we've even done a heat map on Google Maps that's shareable with your community, and it gives your community a way to quickly identify where resources are. So that's a couple things around our stakeholder map that we do. And your last question was about the resiliency factors and the needs assessment. And again, these are survey implements that we've standardized, but we can specialize them based off of what you see as needs in your community. The resiliency factors are things like the health services that are available, housing stability questions, mental health services, and basic needs that any individual will particularly need. But we're also going to be asking them about how they feel about doing business. There's certain activities, they call them TFAR activities, thoughts, feelings, actions, and results. And we use these as models in these resiliency surveys and self-efficacy surveys to determine what else or what are some of the underlying issues that could come to the fore when you're trying to build out your business community that might need to be addressed that aren't immediately available, or that someone might not be 100% forthcoming with that information, but still needs to be addressed in your community. So I hope that answers your question, Kisa. And again, I really recommend that you sign up for our webinar in September to learn a little bit more, and we kind of go into a deep dive there. The last question here in the Q&A, Elise, this will be for you. Here's a question and then a little explanation. It says, this is from Nadia Anderson, and Nadia asks, would you work with a neighborhood ownership-based food co-op that is struggling to secure funding for construction? And a little detail beyond that. They want to be a model for community-based real estate development, as well as being a specific local asset in an area facing gentrification, after being a disinvested food desert for decades. They're also coming out of a larger community coalition. In other words, starting with a specific project to lead to a broader neighborhood-based work.
Yeah. Honestly, didn't go too much into it, but I think I mentioned it a little bit. You know, when we talk about neighborhood strategies, we talk about a series of anchors and then sort of supporting assets that happen around that. And, you know, particularly food, things that address food ecosystems that also create jobs, those are always really good candidates for supporting that overall strategy. And frequently people approach us to look at the anchor, and then it leads to us working to support them to develop a neighborhood strategy around that anchor. I mean, that's kind of what's happening in the Bronx now, even though we got to this milestone with Kingsbridge, and we've been working on identifying and securing and preserving other affordable housing and small business space in the surrounding neighborhoods to mitigate the anticipated impacts of the armory itself coming into development. So yeah, and it's actually really important, I think, that when you're even in the anchor stage, you have an eye towards how this anchor is going to impact the neighborhood around us, not just because of good or bad, right? And that's one of the key functions of the community context value. Because when you're dealing with this asset can bring both value and it could bring both threats and risk. And how do we mitigate that and put a strategy and particularly a capital plan that supports that? So not just the construction financing of the site itself, but also how you can subsidize or be creative with the long-term operations of the site to create and support and sustain, you know, overall neighborhood goals. Maybe just as an example, one of my jobs, many years ago, I worked at an impact investing firm with a job creation mandate. And we were going around and sort of buying up businesses that were hiring people, particularly in Black and brown neighborhoods, and sort of, you know, creating jobs that way. And so we sort of would target a neighborhood and say, okay, the average age or education of folks who live here is this much, so they actually can qualify for these jobs that would pay high wages. And because there's lots of SBA funding and impact capital that supports this. So it's actually a really good impact strategy specifically for job creation. But a lot of the businesses we ended up buying would be like brick and mortar traditional businesses. They'd be call centers. I mean, this is some of you, I don't know how old you guys are, but you know, call center is, right? There should be call centers, you know, it would be bakeries, it would be delivery places, like kind of logistics hubs. And, you know, you'd have people coming in every day to like report, to clock into work. And so we had to buy a building to support that. And you know, it's similar with a grocery store, right? Like there's some activity happening in there that's useful, but it's also contained within a building. And that building was actually creating a lot of real estate value around it, because now you got people coming in every day and they're going out to get lunch and they're doing all these things. And so that concept of like, hey, there's actually a lot of connections between the activities that are happening in the buildings and outside the buildings. And as we invest and we think strategically about how we put these things together, that's sort of the magic between linking job creation with real estate development. And I think we've all seen the reverse example. Like, I won't name names, but I'm sure, depending on where you've come from, you've seen some massive sports stadium development come in and promise lots of jobs and lots of things, and then kind of nothing's happened. Or different cities in America that have huge, strong economies and tons of vacant retail spaces. It's because it actually requires a lot of tactical strategy to connect those two things. And so starting with an anchor, like a clear anchor, and then really developing a strategy around that can be super powerful. And there's lots of folks on the financing and capital side who understand that and would be really interested, I think, in getting started in something like that.
Okay, Elise, we've got another really good one in the comments for you.
Okay.
Say, can you speak more specifically about how you help organizations secure funding for brick and mortar projects, and what type of funding are available for this beyond the typical real estate investments that are often out of reach for community developers?
I'm assuming this person means a brick and mortar, like real estate development, maybe
Let's go
not a
with that.
business.
Yes.
Okay. Um, yeah, so there's a large and growing ecosystem of capital supportive of impact real estate. I'm not saying it's there already, but it's getting there. Starting with everything from grants, going into PRIs, MRIs, other types of flexible creative capital that sits more on the philanthropy side and the investment side, going into CDFIs, which are lenders, different types of pieces. So there's actually a pretty wide ecosystem. Typically, when we work with folks, we start with understanding who they are as an organization, what are the assets, if any, that they own, and what type of leverage they might have currently. And then we kind of work with them to position them in a way to attract the capital that they want to get. So if they are a smaller organization, depending on where they are, that might look at more catalytic philanthropy, which could come from high net worth individuals or foundations or other things like that, before you have to tap into like traditional real estate capital. This is where gentrification math comes in. If you take the racism out of gentrification, it's actually just math. So, and if your cost of capital is really high, that means you actually have to charge a lot of rent. That's what pushes up rents and pushes out, creates displacement. And so when you're doing impact projects or things like that, and that's not really an option, you have to sort of counterbalance that. So starting with kind of a clear positioning and strategy around what you're looking for, and a really articulated strategy around what the impact you're doing and why, that will make your project attractive for other types of capital that aren't just looking for returns driven. Again, without knowing what your project is, and there's lots of different things out there. And I would say on an impact spectrum, from small grants for pre-development all the way through probably what our most institutional vehicle is, which is maybe like not CDFI, but traditional bank real estate financing for impact capital, or like new markets tax credits and tax credit financing, like different things like that. So there's definitely a really big spectrum, but I would say in the beginning, it's about understanding who you are as an organization, the position you play, and being really clear and articulating around the value that you're bringing to position yourself to be able to attract capital in alignment with your vision and your values for what you're trying to do.
Yeah. I think there's a really good follow-on question to this, and it's straightforward here. So, or maybe not. Who takes the risk on these projects?
Mm. So this comes up a lot. Well, let me talk about like us as EFM, and then develop like the partners that we work with, or maybe I'll do it in reverse. One of the key, like we talked about LCDC and we talked about Northwest Bronx. And one of the things that you have to understand, or it's important to understand, those organizations have been around for a long time. They've been around 50 years. And the concept of doing something different was a huge risk. So that type of risk, like, well, what does it mean to kind of shift? And then how do we build the reality in our capital markets is if you don't take risk, you can't make decisions, right?
Right.
You have to figure out how to take risk as an organization in order to be able to do this. And so whether that's financial risk and building your balance sheet and bringing other types of investments. So we talked about LCDC, we did a philanthropy capital campaign to build their balance sheet so then they could take on more credit. Through different, so there are lots of impact facilities out there, like different philanthropy institutions will do credit enhancements, like lines of credit, things like that. There's other ways to be creative about that. So whether it's how you build your own balance sheet to be able to take that risk, with the understanding that if you want someone else to take that risk, then that means you're giving away a lot of your control and your power as an organization to enact your vision. As projects get bigger and bigger, you have to be very clear about how you identify and discern like what your vision and values are and what are the most important things so you can effectively make those partnerships at risk. But it's always a question of how much do you need versus and how much are you sort of willing to partner to achieve what you're trying to do. That's like one side of who's taking the risk. I'd say the other side of the risk, and particularly when we work with faith-based whether they're community-based organizations or even investors. I'm sure, I don't think there's a lot of investors on this call, so we're not really talking about that work, but we do a good amount of work with investors who are also trying to move their capital in alignment with their mission. They have their own structural challenges. But there's also a lot of, there's a question of who's taking the risk from a missional and an impact standpoint. And how do I bring my community and my leadership team along with me? Sometimes we call that pastoral technical assistance in a faith-based setting, but that is also a real risk that needs to be taken on. So those are like, there's a huge spectrum of what that looks like depending on the process. And a lot of our frameworks and how we work are designed to help people figure out what's appropriate for them and for their organization. As EFM, as a company, we primarily do a lot of our work as consulting, mostly so we can stay out of the conversation, right? Because as owners reps, we want to make sure you do the thing that's right for you, not the thing, because once we're at risk, then we got to do stuff that makes sense for us too. And particularly because we do a lot of catalytic early stage stuff, like that's not something that we've seen community groups need that input. Although as projects get further along the pipeline, they're getting closer to construction financing, we figure out other ways to be at risk with our partners in terms of how we structure our consulting engagements, and then truly being at risk where we can to help them actually raise financing and do what they need to do to actually execute. But again, it's always driven by our partners and what they need and what's most appropriate for their what they're trying to do, because there's definitely no like one size fits all. And the more we can get philanthropy to take on that risk so that we don't have to put that on community-based organizations, the better.
Okay, since the questions keep rolling in, but we only have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure that everyone has your information so that you can
Yes.
follow up with them. I did see a question that you could probably answer really quickly, which is how do you get paid as a
Oh,
company?
yeah. It depends on the organization. Sometimes organizations get their own grants and funding to pay for some of our early catalytic work, and it's based off, it's like sort of under the capacity building strategic planning umbrella. Sometimes we work with folks collaboratively to raise money to pay ourselves. And then the third option is when we do stuff at risk where it makes sense. But I always caution people, like, we gotta have a really good relationship, and I want us to be comfortable because it's more important for their, the folks we work with, their vision and values to do that. But we can also be creative around how we structure things, how we do payments. We don't have like a layaway situation or anything, but we can, you know, we often work with folks and figure things out. But it is actually very important and core to our mission that we don't sort of impose like our incentive structure on that, but we do try to be at risk in different ways in terms of completion milestones, in terms of like what we get done and how we get done that way. If folks have questions about like whether it's us or like any other consultant you're interested in working on and how to like raise capital. The other piece, we don't talk about this, and I mentioned it, we are doing a lot of infrastructure building on a national level to support community groups, particularly around getting the capital and resources that they need to buy land at scale. So we know that's a real problem, and we're doing our part building several capital vehicles to support people. So if that's something you're actively looking at or needing help with, and you know, we see you, we hear you, feel free to reach out, and we're doing what we can to support folks across the ecosystem, whether they work with us or not.
Awesome.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Oh, I was saying to Mia's question, so we say community-based organizations, so that can actually include private developers as long as they have an impact commitment and a commitment to a place. It's that sort of long-term value or long-term relationships in those places is doesn't mean it's just nonprofits. And when we've worked with private developers in a place, we typically have like a process where we align around vision and values to ensure that we're a good fit. But sometimes private developers have access to capital sources that are outside of what we can do, and that it becomes more valuable for them. So if folks are private developers, we're happy to have those conversations too.
Okay.
All
And
right, now I'm done. I'm also sweating. It's very hot in here. Go ahead.
there's more, but I just want to make sure everyone has your email. There's a question in here about projects in Vegas or Atlanta. So I will just close this out by thanking Elise and Todd so much for this amazing presentation. Thanking everyone for your time today. Please come back for next month's webinar with Dr. Andre Perry. Please join us for our
I'll be at that one.
practitioners course September 11th and 12th. All of that info is on our website, justcommunities.info. You can get in touch with East Freedman and Main at info@efm-co.com. I think that's it. Any last plugs from you guys? No?
Nope.
All
Our
right.
Thank you for your
newsletter.
time today.
Have
Yeah,
a
thank you,
beautiful day,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you so much. Let's see.